This is Rendlesham Forest, England, a place where UFOs lit up the sky in 1980, where whispers of something older, hungrier, linger in the shadows. My name's Ansel Carver, and I'm about to tell you how my friends and I walked into this forest for a weekend of camping and found something we'll never escape. Stick around, because by the end of this story, you'll be checking your own backyard for glowing eyes in the dark. The hum of the old van's engine was the only thing keeping me grounded as we wound through the narrow roads of Suffolk, England. I'm Ansel Carver, 23, fresh out of college with a degree I wasn't sure I'd ever use, and a restlessness that gnawed at my bones. The city, Boston, with its honking horns and crowded bars, had started to feel like a cage. So when my friend Veda Morrow, 21, pitched the idea of a camping trip across the Atlantic, I didn't hesitate. "Rendlesham Forest," she'd said, her voice crackling with excitement over a late-night group chat. "It's not just some random woods. It's the place. UFO sightings, military cover-ups, and legends of things that don't belong to this world. Veda's always been the one chasing mysteries. She's got this wild energy, like she's half convinced the universe is hiding something just for her to find. Her dark curls bounce when she talks, and her eyes, sharp, hazel, always scanning, make you believe she might actually uncover it. Thane Kessler, 24, was the skeptic of our group, a lanky guy with a crooked grin and a habit of calling anything remotely spooky tourist bait. Sigrid Hale, 22, was quieter, the kind of person who notices things others miss. She'd sit there, twirling her silver necklace, her pale blonde hair catching the light, and drop some observation that'd make you rethink everything. Together we were a mismatched crew, bound by late-night study sessions and a shared hunger for something bigger than our everyday lives. We'd scraped together just enough cash to fly to London, rent a beat-up van that smelled faintly of mildew, and stock up on camping gear from a discount store. The plan was simple. 3 days in Rendlesham Forest, a place infamous for the 1980 UFO incident, where American military personnel saw lights dancing through the trees. But Veda wasn't sold on the alien angle. "It's not just spaceships," she'd said, leaning across the table at a pub in Ipswich the night before we set out. "The locals talk about older things, spirits, entities, stuff that was here before the Romans, things that don't like visitors." Thane had laughed, spilling his beer. "You're buying into ghost stories now. Next, you'll be hunting Bigfoot." Sigrid, though, hadn't smiled. She'd just stared into her glass, her fingers tightening around her necklace. The drive from London had been long, the roads shrinking from highways to winding lanes, flanked by hedgerows and fields that stretched into the mist. By the time he reached the outskirts of Rendlesham, the sky was a dull gray, the kind that presses down on you like a warning. The forest loomed ahead, a dark wall of pine and oak, its edges blurring into the fog. The radio, which had been spitting out fuzzy British pop, crackled and died as we turned onto a dirt track barely wide enough for the van. "Great," Thane muttered, slumping in the passenger seat. "We're officially in the middle of nowhere." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening as the tires crunched over gravel. The air coming through the open windows was cool, heavy with the scent of damp earth and resin. It wasn't just the isolation that set my nerves on edge. It was the way the trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangling overhead like a net. Veda, sitting cross-legged in the back with a map spread across her lap, was undeterred. "This is it," she said, pointing to a spot marked with a red X. "East Gate, near the old air base. That's where the UFO stuff went down. We'll camp close by, explore the trails, maybe find something weird." Her grin was infectious, but I caught Sigrid's eye in the rear-view mirror. She wasn't smiling. We pulled into a small clearing just off the track, where the forest opened up enough to let a sliver of daylight through. The ground was soft, carpeted with pine needles and patches of moss. A narrow stream gurgled nearby, its water catching the light like liquid glass. It was beautiful, in a stark, untamed way, but there was something off about it, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for us to make the first move. We piled out of the van, stretching our legs and unloading gear. Thane hauled the cooler, grumbling about the weight, while Veda started snapping photos with her phone, narrating like she was filming a documentary. "Day 1 in Rendlesham, where the unknown awaits," she announced, panning across the trees. I tried to laugh, but the sound felt thin, swallowed by the vastness around us. Setting up camp took longer than it should have. The tents, cheap, bought on sale, kept slipping on the uneven ground, and Thane managed to snap a pole before Sigrid quietly fixed it with duct tape. By the time we had 2 tents standing and a fire pit dug, the light was fading, the sky streaked with violet and gold. I knelt by the stream to fill a water bottle, and for a moment I thought I saw something move in the reflection, a flicker of shadow that didn't match the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. "You okay, Ansel?" Sigrid's voice made me jump. She was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed, watching me with those sharp gray eyes. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." We built a fire. As the temperature dropped, the flames casting flickering shadows on the trunks around us. Veda pulled out a bag of marshmallows, passing them around while she launched into a rundown of Rendlesham's history. "December 1980, she began, her voice low and theatrical. "Military guys from the nearby RAF base see lights in the forest, bright, moving, not like any aircraft. They follow them, find a craft, maybe even touch it. The next night, more lights. Radiation readings go nuts. The government says it was a lighthouse, but come on, a lighthouse doesn't leave burn marks on trees." Thane snorted, toasting a marshmallow until it charred. "Or," he said, "it's a bunch of bored soldiers making it up to mess with people." Veda rolled her eyes. "Then why do the locals avoid this place? Why do hikers keep reporting things, voices, shadows, stuff moving in the woods?" I glanced at Sigrid, expecting her to weigh in, but she was staring into the fire, her face unreadable. The crackle of the flames filled the silence, and for a moment I could almost believe we were just 4 friends on a normal camping trip. But then the wind shifted, carrying a faint, sharp smell, like ozone or something burning far away. I looked out to the forest, where the darkness seemed to pulse, thicker than it should have been. "Did you hear that?" Sigrid's voice was barely a whisper. We froze, straining to listen. Nothing. Just the hiss of the fire and the distant gurgle of the stream. But the hairs on my neck stood up, and I knew I wasn't the only one who felt it. "Let's call it a night," I said, trying to sound casual. We doused the fire, the embers hissing as they died, and crawled into our tents, Veda and Sigrid in one, Thane and me in the other. The forest was quiet now, but it wasn't the comforting quiet of a summer night. It was heavy, expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent's ceiling, listening to Thane's steady breathing. Every rustle outside made my heart skip. a twig snapping, leaves shifting. I told myself it was just the forest settling, just animals moving in the dark. But as I drifted towards sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the thin nylon walls, watching us. The next morning I woke to the sound of Veda's voice, bright and insistent. "Rise and shine, ghost hunters," she called, already unzipping her tent. The air was cold, the ground damp with dew. Sigrid was sitting by the stream, sketching in a small notebook, her movements precise, but guarded. Thane groaned as he crawled out, rubbing his eyes. "This better be worth it," he muttered, kicking at a pine cone. I started the camp stove, boiling water for coffee, and tried to shake off the unease from the night before. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more like a postcard of untouched wilderness. But there was still something off, like a note played just out of tune. While we ate breakfast, granola bars and instant coffee, Veda spread out a map of Rendlesham, marking trails with a red pen. "There's a spot called the UFO landing site," she said, tapping the paper. "It's where the soldiers saw the craft. We should check it out today, maybe find some weird vibes." Thane smirked, but I noticed he kept glancing at the trees, like he was half expecting something to step out. Sigrid closed her notebook, slipping it into her pack. "I found something this morning," she said quietly. We turned to her and she pointed to a patch of ground near the stream. There, in the soft mud, was a single footprint, too large for any of us, with long pointed toes that didn't look human. Veda's eyes lit up, but there was a tremor in her voice. "Okay, that's weird. Maybe a prank." Thane crouched beside it, frowning. "Or a bear. Do they have bears here?" I shook my head. "Not in England." The footprint was fresh, the edges sharp, like it had been made just before dawn. I scanned the trees, my stomach twisting. Nothing moved, but the forest felt alive, its silence more oppressive than any sound. Sigrid met my gaze, her expression unreadable, but heavy with something unspoken. We packed up for the day's hike, slinging on backpacks and checking our gear. Veda led the way, her excitement cutting through the tension, but I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. The trail was narrow, overgrown with ferns and roots that snagged at our boots. The air grew cooler as we went deeper, the scent of pine sharpening with something else, something metallic, like old coins. About a mile in we found a clearing, where the trees formed a near-perfect circle, their branches arching inward like a cathedral. In the center was a flat stone, its surface etched with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals, jagged lines, something that might have been an eye. Veda knelt beside it, tracing the carvings with her finger. "This isn't on any map," she said, her voice hushed. Thane shifted uncomfortably. "Probably some art project. Hippies, you know." But Sigrid's hand went to her necklace, her lips moving silently like she was praying. I wanted to agree with Thane, to laugh it off, but the clearing felt wrong. The air was too still, the light too dim, like the sun couldn't quite reach us. I noticed something else. Small piles of twigs arranged around the stone, each one tied with what looked like hair. Human hair. "We should go," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. Veda nodded, but her eyes lingered on the stone like it was calling her. As we turned to leave, a low hum vibrated through the ground, faint but unmistakable, like the pulse of something waking up. We froze, looking at each other. "What the hell was that?" Thane whispered. No one answered. The hum faded, but the forest seemed to tighten around us, the shadows stretching longer than they should have. Back at camp, We tried to shake off the morning's unease. Thane started a fire, joking about roasting hot dogs and forgetting why all this creepy crap. Veda pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos of the stone, zooming in on the symbols. "I'm gonna look these up when we get service," she said, but her usual spark was dimmer, like the forest was draining her. Sigrid sat apart, sketching again, her pencil moving faster now, almost frantic. I wanted to ask what she was drawing, but something in her posture, rigid, closed off, stopped me. As the sun dipped below the trees, the temperature plummeted, and the forest came alive with small sounds, rustling leaves, distant snaps, the occasional hoot of an owl. We huddled around the fire, passing around a flask of whiskey Thane had snuck into his pack. The alcohol burned, but it didn't touch the cold knot in my chest. Veda tried to lighten the mood, telling a half-hearted story about a college prank, but her eyes kept darting to the darkness beyond the firelight. Thane was quieter than usual, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous energy. Sigrid didn't speak at all, just stared into the flames, her fingers twisting her necklace until the chain left red marks on her skin. Then it happened. A sound, low, guttural, like a growl, but too deliberate, too close. It came from the direction of the stream, just outside the circle of firelight. We froze, the flask slipping from Thane's hand and hitting the ground with a dull thud. "What was that?" Veda whispered, her voice barely audible. I grabbed a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the trees. Nothing. Just shadows and the glint of water. But the air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Sigrid stood, her sketchbook falling to the ground, pages fluttering open to reveal frantic drawings of eyes, hundreds of them staring out from the paper. "Something's out there," she said, her voice steady but laced with fear. I wanted to tell her she was imagining it, that it was just the whiskey or the wind, but I couldn't, because I felt it too, a presence, heavy and watchful, pressing against the edges of our camp. The growl came again, closer now, followed by the snap of a branch. Thane scrambled to his feet, grabbing a stick from the fire, the burning end flaring in the dark. "Show yourself," he shouted, but his voice cracked, betraying him. The forest answered with silence, not the calm silence of a sleeping world, but a predatory one, the kind that waits for you to blink. We stood there, hearts pounding, flashlight beams cutting through the night, until the cold forced us back to the fire. No one suggested going to bed. We sat in a tight circle, feeding the flames until they roared, the light pushing back the darkness but not the fear. I kept my hand on the knife in my pocket, its weight a small comfort against whatever was out there. Hours later, when the first hint of dawn grayed the sky, we finally dared to move. The forest was still, the air thick with mist that clung to our clothes. Thane kicked dirt over the fire, muttering about getting the hell out of here, but Veda shook her head. "We're here for 3 days," she said, her voice stubborn but shaky. "We can't just run because of noises." Sigrid didn't argue, but she picked up her sketchbook, clutching it like a shield. I looked out at the trees, their trunks fading into the fog, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold. The footprint by the stream was gone, washed away by the night's dew, but its image was burned into my mind. The stone in the clearing, the hum, the growl, they weren't just random. They were pieces of something bigger, something we'd stumbled into without understanding. Rendlesham wasn't just a forest. It was alive, aware, and it knew we were here. As we packed for the day's hike, I caught Sigrid's eye, She didn't say anything, but her expression told me she felt it too. We weren't just visitors. We were intruders, and whatever lived in these woods wasn't done with us yet. The morning after our first night in Rendlesham Forest, I woke to a chill that seeped through my sleeping bag and into my bones. The air was thick with mist, curling around the tents like ghostly fingers, and the forest was silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive quiet that made my skin crawl. I'm Ansel Carver, 23, and I was starting to wonder if Veda Morrow's crazy idea to camp in this infamous UFO hotspot was a mistake. Yesterday, we'd set up camp near a stream, felt the forest's watchful presence, and heard a growl in the night that none of us could explain. Sigrid Hale's sketchbook, filled with frantic drawings of eyes, was still vivid in my mind, and that single, unnatural footprint by the stream haunted me. But it was only day 2. We had no idea how much worse it would get. I crawled out of the tent, my breath visible in the cold. Sigrid, 22, was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the stream with her sketchbook open, her pale blonde hair catching the faint light. She wasn't drawing now, just staring at the water, her silver necklace glinting as she twisted it. "You okay?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't look up. "I didn't sleep," she said, her tone flat. "Something was walking around us last night, not an animal. It stopped right outside my tent." Her words hit like a punch. I wanted to say she was imagining it, but the memory of that growl, low, deliberate, too close, stopped me. Veda, 21, emerged from her tent, her dark curls tangled and her hazel eyes bright despite the early hour. "Morning, ghost hunters," she called, trying to sound cheerful, but there was an edge to her voice like she was forcing it. Thane Kessler, 24, groaned as he stumbled out, his lanky frame hunched against the cold. "This place is giving me the creeps," he muttered, kicking at the damp ground, "and I'm not even the one buying into Veda's X-Files nonsense." Veda shot him a look but didn't argue. She was too busy scanning the camp, her gaze lingering on the spot where we'd seen the footprint yesterday. It was gone now, smoothed away by the dew, but its shape was burned into my mind, long, narrow, with toes that looked more like claws. We gathered around the camp stove, heating water for coffee and passing around granola bars. The fire pit from last night was a pile of ash, and the air smelled of wet pine and something sharper, like ozone after a storm. Veda spread her map on a folding table, her red pen circling trails. "We need to explore," she said, her voice steadier now. "That stone we found yesterday, the one with the symbols, it's not on any guidebook. I bet there's more out there, maybe tied to the UFO stuff or something else." Thane snorted, but I noticed his hands were unsteady as he poured coffee. "You're going to drag us into some Blair Witch crap, aren't you?" he said. Sigrid stayed silent, her eyes flicking to the trees, like she was waiting for something to step out. I wasn't sure I wanted to go deeper into Rendlesham. The forest already felt like it was closing in, its shadows too dark, its silence too heavy. But Veda's enthusiasm was hard to resist, and sitting around camp, jumping at every sound, wasn't much better. "Let's do it," I said, trying to sound confident. "But we stick together, and we're back before dark." Sigrid nodded, slipping her sketchbook into her pack, while Thane muttered something about needing more whiskey. We set out after breakfast, backpacks slung over our shoulders, flashlights clipped to our belts. The trail was barely a path, a faint line of trampled grass winding through towering pines and gnarled oaks. The mist hadn't lifted, and it clung to our clothes, cold and clammy. Veda led the way, her phone out to snap photos, though she kept muttering about the lack of signal. "This place is like a black hole," she said, shaking her head. Thane trailed behind, swinging a stick like a makeshift sword, but his usual bravado was thin, his eyes darting to the sides. Sigrid walked beside me, her steps careful, her gaze fixed on the ground as if searching for more footprints. The forest was beautiful in a haunting way. Moss draped over roots like velvet, sunlight filtering through the canopy in pale, shifting beams. But every step felt like we were pushing against something, an invisible barrier that didn't want us here. The air grew heavier, the scent of pine mixing with that metallic tang I'd noticed before. About a half-mile in, we found a tree unlike the others, its bark stripped in long vertical gashes, the wood beneath raw and glistening with sap. The cuts were too clean, too high, like they'd been made with a blade or claws. Veda crouched beside it, her fingers hovering over the marks. "This wasn't a bear," she said, her voice low. "Bears don't cut like this." Thane laughed, but it was forced. "Maybe a lumberjack with a grudge," he said, but his eyes were wide, scanning the trees. Sigrid stepped closer, her hand brushing the bark. "It's fresh," she said, almost to herself. "And it's not the only one." She pointed to another tree a few yards away, then another, each marked, with the same precise gashes. A pattern was forming, a trail of wounded trees leading deeper into the forest. My stomach twisted. "We should turn back," I said. But Veda was already moving, following the marks like they were breadcrumbs. "Come on, Ansel," she called. "This is what we came for." I hesitated, but Sigrid was already following, and Thane shrugged, muttering, "Might as well see where this goes." The trail of gashed trees led us to a ravine, where the ground dipped sharply, and the trees grew denser, their branches knitting together to block out the light. The mist was thicker here, swirling around our ankles like a living thing. At the bottom of the ravine we found something that stopped us cold. A circle of stones, each one the size of a dinner plate, arranged with eerie precision. In the center was a pile of bones, small, delicate, like they belonged to birds or rabbits, but twisted together with what looked like sinew or dried vines. The bones were clean, polished, as if they'd been handled recently. Veda knelt beside the circle, her breath catching. "This is no prank," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "Look at the patterns. It's like a ritual." Thane backed away, his stick raised like a club. "Ritual? Veda, this is some cult shit. We need to get out of here." But Sigrid was staring at the bones, her face pale. "They're not just animal bones," she said, her voice barely audible. She pointed to one, larger than the others, with a shape that looked disturbingly human, a finger bone, maybe, or part of a wrist. My mouth went dry. "That's not possible," I said, but the words felt hollow. The air in the ravine was wrong, heavy with that metallic smell, now mixed with something sour, like decay. Veda pulled out her phone, snapping photos of the circle, but her hands were shaking. "We need to document this," she said, more to herself than us. "This could be huge, proof of something." Sigrid grabbed her arm, her grip tight. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp. "Whatever this is, it doesn't want to be seen." Veda froze, and for the first time I saw doubt in her eyes. Thane was already backing up the ravine, his face ashen. "I'm with Sigrid," he said. "Let's go, now." But before we could move, a sound cut through the silence, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat echoing through the trees. It was faint, but growing louder, closer, coming from the direction we'd come. My heart pounded, my flashlight beam swinging wildly as I searched for the source. "What the hell is that?" Thane whispered, his voice cracking. Sigrid's hand went to her necklace, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Veda stood frozen, her phone still raised, like she was trying to record the sound. The thumping stopped, replaced by a single sharp crack, like a branch snapping under immense weight. We ran. The ravine was steep, the ground slick with mud, and I nearly fell as I scrambled up. Veda was right behind me, her breath ragged, while Sigrid helped Thane, who was cursing under his breath. The forest seemed to shift around us, the trail harder to find, the trees pressing closer. I kept expecting to see something, a figure, a shape, but there was nothing, just the weight of eyes on my back. When we finally stumbled back to the clearing near our camp, we were panting, our clothes soaked with sweat and mist. The tents were still there, untouched, but the fire pit was scattered, the ashes spread across the ground like someone had kicked them. Back at camp, we collapsed, our breaths visible in the cold air. Veda sat on a log, scrolling through her photos, her face pale. "I got some of it," she said, zooming in on the bone circle. The symbols on the stones were clearer now. Spirals, jagged lines, and that eye-like shape staring out from the screen. Thane paced, his stick still clutched in one hand. "We're not going back there," he said, his voice shaking. "That was messed up, Veda. Those bones, that sound." Sigrid was silent, her sketchbook open again, her pencil scratching furiously. I glanced over her shoulder and felt my stomach lurch. She was drawing the bone circle, but the stones were covered in eyes, hundreds of them, watching from every angle. I tried to calm everyone down, but my own nerves were frayed. "Let's just stay here for now," I said. "Regroup, eat something, figure out what's next." But even as I spoke, I was scanning the trees, half expecting that thumping to start again. We built a new fire, the flames a small comfort against the growing dark. Veda kept her phone close like it was a lifeline, while Thane sat with his back to a tree, his eyes never leaving the forest. Sigrid's sketching slowed, but she didn't look up, her face drawn and tired. As the afternoon faded into evening, the mist thickened, swallowing the world beyond our camp. The forest was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that hides something, the kind that makes you strain to hear what's coming. We ate a quick dinner, canned beans and bread, tasteless in our mouths, and tried to talk about anything else. College, plans for the summer, even the stupid UFO stories Veda loved. But every word felt forced, every laugh too loud. The fire crackled, casting long shadows that danced on the tents, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Then Sigrid spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's not just the bones," she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. "I saw something in the ravine when we were running, a shape, tall, in the mist. It wasn't human." We stared at her, the air growing colder. Veda's phone slipped from her hand, hitting the ground with a soft thud. Thane laughed, but it was nervous, almost desperate. "Come on, Sigrid, don't start with that," he said. "It was just the fog playing tricks." But Sigrid shook her head, her fingers tightening around her necklace. "It saw me," she whispered, "and it knew my name." Before anyone would respond, a new sound broke the silence, a soft, deliberate scrape, like something dragging across the ground, coming from the direction of the stream. We froze, our flashlights snapping on, beams cutting through the mist. The scrape came again, closer, followed by a low, guttural hum, like the one we'd heard in the ravine, but deeper, more insistent. My heart hammered, my knife now in my hand, its blade glinting in the firelight. Thane stood, his stick raised, while Veda grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she hit record. Sigrid didn't move, her eyes locked on the darkness, like she was waiting for whatever she'd seen to step into the light. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my chest, and then silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. We stood there, breaths held, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. But as I swept my flashlight across the trees, I saw it. A single, fresh footprint in the mud, identical to the one from yesterday, pressed deep into the ground just beyond our camp. It was pointed toward us, like whatever made it had been standing there, watching, before slipping back into the night. The second day in Rendlesham Forest dawned gray and heavy, the kind of morning that feels like the world's pressing down on you. I'm Ansel Carver, 23, and I was starting to think we'd made a terrible mistake coming here. The first night had brought a growl in the dark and a footprint that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Yesterday, we'd ventured deeper, finding gashed trees, a circle of bones, and a thumping sound that chased us back to camp. Sigrid Hale's whispered warning. It saw me, and it knew my name. Still echoed in my head, and the fresh footprint we'd found last night, pointed toward our tents, was a reminder that whatever was out there wasn't done with us. I woke to the sound of rain pattering on the tent, a soft, insistent rhythm that did nothing to ease the knot in my chest. The air was cold, damp, and thick with the scent of wet pine, and that sharp, metallic tang that seemed to follow us everywhere. I crawled out, my boots sinking into the muddy ground, and found Sigrid, 22, already awake. She was sitting under a tarp, her sketchbook open, her pale blonde hair plastered to her face. Her hands moved frantically, sketching eyes, dozens of them staring out from the page like they were alive. "You okay?" I asked. But she didn't answer, just kept drawing, her silver necklace glinting in the dim light. Veda Morrow, 21, was next to emerge, her dark curls frizzy from the humidity. "This weather sucks," she said, trying to sound upbeat, but her hazel eyes were shadowed, like she hadn't slept. Thane Kessler, 24, stumbled out last, his lanky frame hunched against the rain. "I'm done with this place," he muttered, kicking at a puddle. "Bones, weird noises, footprints. I'm not signing up for a horror movie." Veda shot him a look. "We're here to find answers, Thane. That circle we saw yesterday, it's not random. It's connected to the UFO stuff, or something older." Her voice wavered on the last word, betraying her bravado. We huddled under the tarp, eating cold oatmeal and sipping instant coffee that tasted like dirt. The forest was quieter than it should have been. No birds, no squirrels, just the steady drip of rain and the occasional creak of branches bending in the wind. Veda pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken of the bone circle and the carved stones. "These symbols," she said, zooming in on one that looked like a spiral with an eye in the center. "They're not Celtic or Norse. They're something else. I think we need to go back, find more." Thane groaned. "You're insane. You saw that thing in the ravine, heard that thumping, and you want to go deeper." Sigrid's pencil stopped, her eyes flicking to Veda. "She's right," she said, her voice low. "We can't ignore it. But we need to be careful." I didn't want to go back into the forest. The memory of that heartbeat-like thump, the bones twisted together, and Sigrid's claim of a figure in the mist made my skin crawl. But sitting here, surrounded by trees that seemed to lean closer with every passing hour, felt like waiting for something to pounce. "Fine," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. "But we stay on the trail, and we're back before it gets dark." Thane muttered a curse but grabbed his backpack, while Veda's face lit up, her curiosity outweighing her fear. Sigrid slipped her sketchbook into her pack, her expression unreadable but heavy with something I couldn't name. We set out just before noon, the rain reduced to a fine mist that clung to our jackets and stung our faces. The trail was slick, roots and rocks hidden under a layer of mud, and the forest felt different today, more alive, more aware. Veda led the way, her phone tucked away now, her eyes scanning the trees for more gashed bark or strange markings. Thane trailed behind, gripping a heavy flashlight like a club, his usual sarcasm replaced by a tense silence. Sigrid walked beside me, her steps deliberate, her hand brushing her necklace every few minutes. The air was thick with the smell of decay, stronger now, like something rotting just out of sight. We followed the same path as yesterday, past the clearing with the carved stone. But the forest seemed to shift around us, the landmarks less certain. The trees were denser here, their branches tangling overhead to form a tunnel of green and gray. The mist swirled, creating shapes that vanished when I looked too long. A face, a hand, a pair of eyes. I told myself it was just my imagination, but Sigrid's grip on her backpack tightened, and I knew she saw it too. About a mile in, we found another sign, a tree with a single deep gouge, the wood inside stained black, like it had been burned from within. Veda stopped, her breath catching. "This wasn't here yesterday," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thane swore, stepping back. "Great. Now the forest is redecorating." Sigrid knelt beside the tree, her fingers hovering over the mark. "It's not a burn," she said, her voice steady but laced with fear. "It's something else." She pulled her hand back, and I saw it. A faint smear of black on her fingertips, thick and oily, like tar. The smell hit me then, sharp and chemical, mixed with that sour decay. My stomach churned. "We need to keep moving," I said, but my voice shook, and I wasn't sure if I meant forward or back to camp. Veda pushed on, her curiosity driving her, and we followed, the trail sloping downward into a hollow where the air grew colder, the mist thicker. The trees here were older, their trunks gnarled and twisted, some leaning as if bowing to something unseen. We found another circle, smaller than the one in the ravine, but no less unsettling. This one was made of twigs, each one snapped to the same length and arranged in a spiral. In the center was a single feather, black and glossy, too large to belong to any bird I knew. Veda reached for it, but Sigrid grabbed her wrist. "Don't touch it," she said, her voice sharp. "It's not safe." Veda hesitated, then nodded, her hand falling to her side. Thane was pacing now, his flashlight beam swinging wildly. "This is too much," he said, his voice rising. "Twigs, feathers, creepy-ass trees. We're in over our heads, Veda." But before she could respond, Sigrid froze, her eyes fixed on the mist beyond the circle. "There," she whispered, pointing. I followed her gaze, my heart pounding, and saw it. A shape in the fog, tall and thin, its limbs bent at angles that defied nature. Its head was tilted, like it was listening, and for a moment I thought I saw eyes, pale, glowing, locked on us. The air grew heavier, the metallic smell sharpening, and a low hum vibrated through the ground, like the one from yesterday, but closer, more insistent. "Run," I said, my voice barely audible. But we were already moving, scrambling up the hollow, our boots slipping on the mud. The hum followed us, growing louder, and I heard something else. A soft, rhythmic thud, like footsteps keeping pace. I glanced back just once, and wished I hadn't. The shape was closer now, gliding through the mist, its movements jerky, like a puppet on frayed strings. Sigrid stumbled, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. Veda was ahead, her breath ragged, while Thane shouted curses, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog. The trail seemed to twist, the trees closing in, but we kept running, driven by a primal fear that needed no explanation. We burst into the clearing near our camp, collapsing in the mud, our chests heaving. The hum had stopped, the footsteps gone, but the forest was far from silent. The rain had picked up, drumming on the leaves, and the wind carried a faint, sibilant whisper, like voices just out of reach. Veda sat against a tree, her face pale, her phone clutched in her hands. "I saw it," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't human, Ansel. It wasn't." Thane was shaking, his flashlight still on, the beam pointed at the ground. "What the hell was that thing?" he demanded, but no one had an answer. Sigrid was silent, her sketchbook open again, her pencil tracing the shape we'd seen, tall, twisted, with eyes that seemed to burn through the page. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady, and checked the camp. The tents were untouched, but the fire pit was scattered again, the ashes mixed with small white stones I hadn't noticed before. They were smooth, almost polished, and each one had a faint mark, a spiral, like the ones on the carved stone. "Someone's been here," I said, my voice hoarse. Veda shook her head. "Not someone," she whispered. "Something." Thane laughed, a sharp, desperate sound. "You're all losing it. It's just kids or locals screwing with us." But his eyes were wide, and he didn't sound convinced. We rebuilt the fire, the flames a fragile shield against the growing dark. The rain slowed, but the mist lingered, curling around the trees like smoke. We sat in a tight circle, our flashlights on, our voices low. Veda kept her phone out, scrolling through her photos, but the ones from the hollow were blurry, the spiral of twigs distorted, like the camera couldn't focus. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, her fingers trembling. Sigrid's sketching was slower now, more deliberate, but the eyes on her page seemed to multiply, watching us from every angle. Thane gripped his flashlight like a lifeline, his knuckles white. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds, not the natural chorus of crickets or owls, but something else, faint scratches, like claws on bark, a low rhythmic tapping, like fingers on glass, and that whisper again, weaving through the trees. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, but the words felt too clear, too deliberate, though I couldn't make them out. Sigrid's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "It's calling us," she said, her voice barely audible. "It knows we're here." Veda's phone slipped from her hand, and Thane's flashlight beam swung toward the trees, catching nothing but mist. Then it happened, a scream, high and piercing, tearing through the night. It wasn't human, not quite, but it was close enough to make my blood run cold. It came from the direction of the hollow, echoing off the trees, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement. A flicker of pale light, like eyes catching the fire. We scrambled to our feet, our flashlights sweeping the darkness, but the forest was still, the scream fading into silence. "What was that?" Thane whispered, his voice shaking. Sigrid's hand went to her necklace, her lips moving silently. Veda grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to stay here," she said, her voice urgent. "We can't go out there." I nodded, my knife now in my hand, its weight a small comfort against the terror clawing at my chest. We fed the fire until it roared, the light pushing back the shadows but not the fear. The whispers grew louder, circling the camp, and I caught fragments. Names, maybe, or something older, something that didn't belong to any language I knew. Sigrid's sketching stopped, her pencil snapping in her hand. "It's closer," she said, her voice flat, like she was stating a fact. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that we were safe by the fire. But the air was charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then I saw it. A footprint, fresh and deep, pressed into the mud just outside the firelight. It was identical to the ones we'd seen before, but this time it was joined by others, forming a semicircle around our camp, all pointed toward us. My heart stopped, my flashlight beam trembling as it traced the prints. They were too close, too deliberate, like whatever made them had stood there, watching, waiting. Veda's breath hitched, her phone raised as she recorded the prints, her hands shaking. Thane's flashlight beam swung wildly, catching something, a glint of pale light, like eyes, vanishing into the mist. The second night in Rendlesham Forest was a descent into hell. I'm Ansel Carver, 23, and by now I knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The first night had brought a growl and a footprint that didn't belong to anything human. The second day, we'd found gashed trees, a circle of bones, and a thumping sound that chased us back to camp. Yesterday, we'd seen it, a tall, twisted figure in the mist, its pale eyes burning through the fog, and heard a scream that tore through the forest like a warning. The footprints circling our camp, fresh and deliberate, were proof that whatever was out there wasn't just watching anymore. It was closing in. I sat by the fire, my knife gripped so tight my knuckles ached, the flames casting jittery shadows on the tents. The rain from earlier had stopped, but the mist was thicker now, a suffocating veil that swallowed the world beyond our camp. Veda Morrow, 21, was hunched over her phone, her dark curls falling over her face as she replayed the blurry video of the twig spiral we'd found in the hollow. Her hazel eyes were bloodshot, her usual spark dimmed by fear. Thane Kessler, 24, paced the edge of the firelight, his flashlight beam swinging wildly, his lanky frame tense like a coiled spring. "We're sitting ducks," he muttered, his voice raw. "That thing, whatever it is, it's toying with us." Sigrid Hale, 22, sat cross-legged, her sketchbook open, her pale blonde hair glowing in the firelight. She wasn't drawing now, just staring at the page, with a figure from the mist stared back, its eyes rendered in stark, obsessive detail. The air was heavy, with the scent of wet earth, and that sharp, metallic tang that had followed us since we arrived. The forest was alive with sounds, scratches, whispers, the occasional snap of a branch. But they weren't random. They were deliberate, circling us, testing our nerve. Veda's phone pinged, a low battery warning, and she swore under her breath. "I got some of the footprints," she said, her voice trembling. "But the video from the hollow, it's corrupted. It's just static now." Thane stopped pacing, his flashlight beam fixed on her. "Corrupted? Veda, that's not a coincidence. This place doesn't want us recording it." Sigrid's hand went to her silver necklace, her lips moving silently, like she was praying again. I wanted to tell them we'd be okay, that the fire would keep us safe, but the words stuck in my throat. The footprints from last night, long clawed, forming a semicircle around our camp, were burned into my mind. And Sigrid's words, "It knows my name," echoed like a curse. We tried to barricade ourselves, dragging logs to block the path to the tents. But it felt futile, like piling sticks against a tsunami. The fire was our only real defense, and even that was dwindling, the damp wood hissing and spitting as it burned. The trouble started just after midnight. The whispers we'd heard all evening grew louder, weaving through the trees like a chorus of voices speaking in a language I couldn't grasp. They weren't just sounds. They were heavy, pressing against my skull, filling my head with images of dark, endless woods and eyes that never blinked. Veda dropped her phone, her hands shaking as she pressed them to her ears. "Make it stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. Thane's flashlight beam swept the darkness, catching nothing but mist and the glint of wet bark. "It's just the wind," he said, but his voice was high, panicked, and he didn't believe it any more than I did. Then the fire flickered, the flames dipping low, like something was sucking the air out of the camp. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the ground, the same one we'd heard in the ravine and the hollow. But now, it was everywhere, rattling my teeth. Sigrid stood, her sketchbook falling to the ground, pages fluttering open to reveal those eyes, hundreds of them, staring out from the paper. "It's here," she said, her voice flat, like she'd accepted something we hadn't. Before I could ask what she meant, a shadow moved at the edge of the firelight, tall, thin, its limbs bent wrong, its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach lurch. Its eyes glowed pale, like moonlight on ice, and for a moment, I swore it smiled. "Get back!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet, my knife raised. Thane swung his flashlight, the beam catching the figure for a split second before it vanished, melting into the mist. The hum spiked, a deafening pulse that made my vision blur, and the fire roared back to life, the flames shooting higher than they should have. Veda screamed, stumbling backward, her phone skidding across the ground. Sigrid didn't move, her eyes locked on the spot where the figure had been, her lips still moving in that silent prayer. The forest erupted. Branches snapped, footsteps thudded, and that scream from last night tore through the night again, closer now, raw and unnatural. It wasn't just one voice. It was layered, a chorus of agony and rage that made my blood run cold. Thane grabbed a burning log from the fire, brandishing it like a torch. "Stay back!" he shouted, his voice cracking. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled us, heavy and deliberate, kicking up mud and leaves. I swept my flashlight across the trees, catching glimpses of movement, flashes of pale light, like eyes darting between the trunks. Veda was sobbing now, her hands pressed to her head. "It's in my head," she gasped. "It's saying my name, Ansel. It knows me." I grabbed her arm, pulling her closer to the fire, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Sigrid's voice cut through the chaos, calm but urgent. "Don't listen," she said, her eyes wide. "It wants you to listen. It wants you to answer." Thane swung his torch, the flames casting wild shadows. "Answer what? What the hell is it?" But Sigrid didn't reply, just stepped closer to the fire, her necklace glinting like a beacon. The attack came without warning. A tent collapsed, the poles snapping like dry twigs, and a gust of wind, cold, sharp, smelling of decay, swept through the camp, nearly extinguishing the fire. Something heavy slammed against the logs we'd piled, sending them tumbling, and the footsteps stopped, replaced by a low, rasping breath, like air being sucked through broken glass. I spun, my flashlight beam trembling, and saw it again. The figure, closer now, standing just beyond the firelight. His body was wrong, too tall, too thin, his limbs twisting like they were made of smoke. His eyes locked on me, and for a moment I heard it, a voice in my head, low and sibilant, saying my name. Ansel. Come. I stumbled back, my knife slipping from my hand, the blade sinking into the mud. Veda screamed again, her voice raw, and Thane swung his torch, the flames grazing the figure. It hissed, a sound that made my teeth ache, and retreated, but not far. The footsteps resumed, faster now, circling tighter, and the whispers became a chant, weaving our names into a litany of hunger. Sigrid grabbed my arm, her grip bruising. The fire, she said, her voice urgent. Keep it burning. It hates the light. I nodded, scrambling to throw more wood into the flames, the heat searing my face as the fire roared back to life. But the thing wasn't done. A second tent buckled, the fabric tearing with a sound like ripping flesh, and something moved inside, quick, jerky, like a spider skittering across a web. Thane shouted, swinging his torch, but the figure was gone, replaced by a new sound, a slow, deliberate scraping, like claws dragging across the ground. It came from all sides, closing in, and the fire flickered again, the flames bending as if pressed by an invisible hand. Veda was on her knees, her hands pressed to her ears, muttering, "No, no, no." Sigrid pulled her up, shaking her. "Fight it!" she snapped, her voice fierce. "Don't let it in!" I grabbed my knife from the mud, my hands shaking, and stood back to back with Thane, our flashlights sweeping the darkness. The scraping grew louder, and then I saw them, more figures, shadowy and indistinct, lurking at the edge of the firelight. They weren't as clear as the first, but their eyes glowed, pale and unblinking, and their movements were wrong, like they were mimicking something human but couldn't get it right. The chant in my head grew louder, my name twisting with Veda's, Thane's, Sigrid's, until it was all I could hear. I clenched my jaw, focusing on the fire, on the weight of the knife, on anything to keep that voice out. The hours dragged on, each minute a lifetime. The figures didn't attack again, but they didn't leave. They circled, their footsteps a constant rhythm, their whispers a relentless assault. The fire burned lower, the wood running out, and every time it dimmed, the figures crept closer, their eyes brighter, their shapes more defined. Veda was shaking, her face streaked with tears, but she clung to Sigrid, who stood like a rock, her necklace glowing faintly in the firelight. Thane's torch had gone out, and he was using his flashlight now, his breaths coming in sharp gasps. "We can't keep this up," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's gonna get us." "It won't," Sigrid said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "As long as the fire's burning, it can't." I didn't know how she was so sure, but I clung to her words, throwing the last of our wood into the flames. The fire flared, and the figures hissed, retreating slightly, but the scraping continued, now accompanied by a new sound, a low, rhythmic tapping, like bones knocking together. I swept my flashlight across the camp and froze. The footprints were back, dozens of them, pressed deep into the mud, forming a spiral around us, mirroring the twig circle we'd found in the hollow. Veda saw them, too, her breath hitching. "It's marking us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's claiming us." Thane swore, his flashlight beam trembling. "Claiming us for what?" But Sigrid's eyes were fixed on the darkness, her lips moving again, and I caught a fragment of her prayer, something about light, about protection. The tapping grew louder, and then I saw it, a bundle of twigs and bones, like the one from the ravine, hanging from a tree just outside the firelight. It swung gently, as if moved by an unseen hand, and the air grew colder, the metallic smell sharpening until it burned my throat. The figures moved closer, their shapes flickering like static, their eyes now a sickly green, glowing brighter as the fire weakened. The chant in my head was deafening, my name a scream that drowned out everything else. I gripped my knife, my hands slick with sweat, and stood beside Sigrid, our backs to the fire. Thane was shouting now, his voice lost in the chaos, while Veda clung to her phone, her fingers frozen on the record button. The scraping stopped, replaced by a single, bone-chilling sound, a laugh low and guttural, like gravel grinding together. It came from everywhere and nowhere, and for a moment I thought I saw the first figure again, standing at the center of the spiral, its eyes locked on me. Dawn was still hours away when the attack intensified. The fire sputtered, the flames barely embers, and the figures surged forward, their shapes solidifying, tall, twisted, with limbs that bent like broken branches. Their eyes burned, and their mouths, if they had mouths, moved in sync with the chant. I swung my knife, the blade catching nothing but air, while Thane's flashlight fell, its beam spinning across the ground. Veda screamed, her voice raw, and Sigrid shouted something I couldn't hear, her necklace now glowing brighter, almost blinding. Then it stopped. The figures froze, their eyes dimming, and the chant faded, replaced by a silence so absolute it hurt. The fire flared one last time, a weak sputter of light, and the figures vanished, melting into the mist. The footsteps, the scraping, the tapping, all gone. We stood there, panting, our bodies shaking, the spiral of footprints still etched in the mud around us. Veda collapsed, her phone slipping from her hand. The screen cracked. Thane dropped to his knees, his face buried in his hands. Sigrid stood, her necklace dim now, her eyes haunted but resolute. I looked out at the forest, the mist curling like smoke, and knew we weren't safe. The figures were gone, but they weren't defeated. They were waiting, biding their time, and the spiral around our camp was a promise. They'd be back. I picked up Veda's phone, the cracked screen still glowing, and saw the last frame of her video. A blurry image of the figure, its eyes staring straight into the camera, its mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. The dawn after our second night in Rendlesham Forest was a lie. The sky was gray, the light weak, seeping through the mist like dirty water. I'm Ansel Carver, 23, and I was barely holding it together. The first night had brought a growl and a clawed footprint. The second day, gashed trees and a bone circle marked our intrusion. The third day, a twisted figure in the mist and a scream that wasn't human. Last night had been a nightmare. Shadows attacking, tents collapsing, a spiral of footprints claiming us, and a chant in our heads that knew our names. The fire had saved us, barely, but the figures hadn't left. They were out there, waiting, and the cracked screen of Veda's phone, frozen on that blurred, smiling face, was a promise they'd be back. I stood by the smoldering fire pit, my knife still in my hand, the blade crusted with mud. The camp was a wreck. Tents torn, logs scattered, footprints everywhere, their spiral pattern etched into the ground like a brand. Veda Morrow, 21, sat on a log, her dark curls tangled, her hazel eyes staring at nothing. Her phone was clutched in her lap, the cracked screen dark now, its battery dead. Thane Kessler, 24, was packing gear with shaking hands, his lanky frame hunched, his usual sarcasm gone. "We're leaving," he said, his voice raw. "I don't care if we have to walk to London. I'm done." Sigrid Hale, 22, was by the stream, her pale blonde hair wet with dew, her sketchbook open to a page of spiraling eyes, her silver necklace glinting as she whispered to herself. The air was cold, thick with the scent of decay and that metallic tang that clung to everything. The forest was silent, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a predator watching its prey. I wanted to agree with Thane, to pack up and run, but Sigrid's words from last night, "It's claiming us," hung heavy. The figures, with their pale, glowing eyes and twisted limbs, weren't just hunting us. They wanted something deeper, something we couldn't name. Veda looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't just leave," she said, her eyes haunted. "It knows us now. It won't let us go." Thane spun on her, his face red. "You and your damn mysteries. This isn't a game, Veda. That thing tried to kill us." Sigrid's head snapped up, her voice cutting through. "It's not about leaving," she said, her tone flat. "It's about surviving." I didn't know what to believe anymore. The fire had kept us alive last night, but we were out of wood, and the mist was thicker, curling around the trees like a living thing. The spiral of footprints seemed to pulse in the dim light, and I swore I heard a faint hum, like the one from the ravine, buried deep in the ground. "We pack up," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We get to the van, drive to Woodbridge, and never look back." Veda nodded, but her eyes were distant, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Thane didn't argue, just kept shoving gear into bags. Sigrid closed her sketchbook, slipping it into her pack, her necklace glowing faintly, as if it held some secret we didn't understand. We moved fast, tearing down the tents, stuffing sleeping bags and supplies into the van. Every sound made us jump. The creak of a branch, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves. The forest felt closer now, the trees leaning in, their shadows longer than they should have been. I kept my knife out, my eyes scanning the mist, half expecting those glowing eyes to appear. Veda was silent, her phone now tucked into her pocket, her hands trembling as she tied a rope around the cooler. Thane worked with a frantic energy, muttering to himself, while Sigrid moved methodically, her gaze flicking to the trees, like she was tracking something unseen. As we loaded the last of our gear, I noticed something new. A bundle of twigs and bones, like the one from the ravine, tied with what looked like hair and hanging from a branch near the van. It hadn't been there an hour ago. My stomach lurched, and I pointed it out to Sigrid. She froze, her hand going to her necklace. "It's a marker," she said, her voice low. "It's telling us we can't leave." Thane swore, grabbing a stick to knock it down, but Sigrid stopped him. "Don't," she said, her eyes wide. "It'll make it worse." Veda's breath hitched, and she backed away, her hand clutching her pocket where her phone was. "What does it want?" she whispered. No one answered because we all knew. It wanted us. We piled into the van, the doors slamming shut with a finality that felt like a trap. I turned the key, my heart pounding, and the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. As I pulled onto the dirt track, the mist thickened, swallowing the path ahead. The trees seemed to shift, their branches scraping the van's roof, and that hum was back, louder now, vibrating through the seats. Thane gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white. "Just drive, Ansel," he said, his voice shaking. Veda was in the back, her head pressed against the window, while Sigrid sat beside her, her necklace glowing brighter, her lips moving in that silent prayer. The track was a nightmare, the mud sucking at the tires, the ruts deeper than I remembered. Every turn felt wrong, like the forest was rearranging itself to keep us here. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. A figure stood in the mist behind us, tall and twisted, its eyes glowing green, its mouth open in a silent scream. I floored the gas, the van lurching forward, but the figure kept pace, gliding through the fog, its limbs jerking like a broken marionette. "It's following us!" Veda cried, her voice raw. Thane spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the back window, but the figure was gone, only to reappear on the side of the track, closer now, its eyes locked on me. "Keep going," Sigrid shouted, her voice fierce. "Don't stop." I gripped the wheel, my hands slick with sweat, and pushed the van harder, the engine screaming. The hum was deafening, the air thick with that metallic smell, and the whispers were back, chanting our names in a relentless loop. Veda was sobbing, her hands pressed to her ears while Thane shouted curses, his flashlight beam swinging wildly. Sigrid's necklace glowed like a star, and I swore I saw light pulsing from it, pushing back the mist. But it wasn't enough. The figure appeared again, now in front of us, standing in the middle of the track, its eyes burning through the fog. I swerved, the van skidding, and for a moment I thought we'd crash. But the figure vanished, and the track opened up, the trees thinning as we neared the edge of the forest. The hum faded, the whispers quieted, and the mist began to lift, revealing a gray sky and the faint outline of fields beyond. I didn't stop, didn't breathe, until the forest was a dark line in the rearview mirror, shrinking with every mile. Veda was silent, her face pressed against the window, while Thane slumped in his seat, his flashlight still clutched in his hand. Sigrid's necklace was dim now, her face pale but resolute. We pulled into Woodbridge, a small town just outside Rendlesham, and stopped at a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The neon sign flickered, the air smelled of grease and coffee, and the waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Doris, barely looked at us as she poured our drinks. We sat in a corner booth, our hands wrapped around mugs we didn't drink, our faces drawn and hollow. "You kids okay?" Doris asked, her voice gruff but kind. I lied, my voice flat. "Just got lost in the woods." She nodded, her eyes lingering on us, like she'd heard that excuse before. "Stay out of Rendlesham," she said, turning away. "That place don't let go easy." We didn't talk much, just sat there, the hum of the diner's fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the forest's oppressive silence. Veda's phone was dead, its cracked screen a reminder of the figure's face. Thane's hands shook as he sipped his coffee, his eyes darting to the windows, like he expected to see those glowing eyes outside. Sigrid's sketchbook was on the table, closed now, but I knew what was inside. Eyes, spirals, that twisted figure, all watching us. I wanted to believe we'd escaped, that the forest was behind us, but the weight in my chest told me otherwise. We drove back to London that day, the miles blurring together, the countryside a smear of green and gray. Veda slept, her head against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Thane stared straight ahead, his flashlight still in his lap, like he didn't trust the daylight. Sigrid was quiet, her necklace tucked under her shirt, her eyes fixed on the horizon. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure gliding behind us. But the road was empty, the sky clear. We flew home to Boston the next day, our bags heavier with something we couldn't name. Back in the States, life tried to move on, but we didn't. Veda stopped answering calls, her apartment filled with sketches of spirals and eyes. Her phone replaced but never turned on. Thane started drinking, his nights spent in bars, his days lost to paranoia, jumping at shadows and keeping a flashlight by his bed. Sigrid moved away, somewhere quiet, her letters brief but heavy, always mentioning her necklace, always ending with a warning, "Don't go back." I tried to rebuild, got a job, rented a small place, but the forest followed me. I couldn't sleep, not really. Every creak of the floor, every shadow in the corner, was Rendlesham waiting. One night, weeks later, I found a footprint on my porch, long clawed, pressed into the dust, too fresh to be a coincidence. I told myself it was nothing, just dirt tracked in, but I didn't believe it. I started keeping a fire burning in the fireplace, even in the heat of summer, the flames a fragile shield against the dark. Sometimes late at night, I heard it, a scream, high and piercing, echoing from somewhere far away but unmistakable. It was the same scream from the forest, the same voice that had chanted our names. I went to Veda's place once, hoping to talk, to make sense of it. Her door was unlocked, her apartment a mess of papers and drawings, all spirals, all lies. She wasn't there, but her phone was, its screen glowing with a single image, the figure from Rendlesham, its eyes burning, its mouth open in that silent scream. I left, my heart pounding, and never went back. Thane called me once, drunk, his voice slurred. "It's still out there, Ansel," he said. "It's in my dreams. It's waiting." I didn't know what to say, so I hung up, but his words stayed with me. Sigrid sent me a letter last month, her handwriting shaky but clear. "It's not over," she wrote. "It never will be. The necklace helps, but it's not enough. Keep the light on, Ansel. Always." I don't know where she is, but I keep her letter by my bed, next to the knife I never put away. I don't go near woods anymore, don't trust the dark. I check the locks every night. Keep the fire burning, and listen for that scream, knowing it's out there, somewhere, waiting. Rendlesham didn't just let us go. It marked us, claimed us, and no matter how far we run, it's there. In the shadows, in the quiet, in the moments before dawn when the world is still. I tell myself I survived, that I'm free, but I know better. Some things you don't escape. Some things follow you home, their eyes glowing in the dark, their voices whispering your name. And in the silence of the night, when the fire burns low, I hear it. The forest calling me back, promising I'll never be alone.